The racist socialite pulled her hair thinking she was just a black waitress. What her billionaire husband did would change everything. The scream of pain echoed through the crystal ballroom of the Metropolitan Club in New York, cutting through elegant conversations like breaking glass. All eyes turned to see Isabel Montgomery, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune, clutching a handful of torn-out curly hair between her perfectly manicured fingers. "You spilled champagne on my $15,000 Valentino dress," Isabel yelled, her voice rising an octave as she waved the torn hair like evidence of a crime. "People like you should be more careful when serving your superiors." Kendra Mitchell, 28, clutched the side of her head where strands had been violently torn out, her eyes watering not from physical pain but from the burning humiliation of being attacked in public. She had worked at this charity event to raise funds for rare disease research, ironically, the same cause that had destroyed her life 3 years ago. Isabel's dress had only a few drops of champagne on the hem, the result of Kendra genuinely tripping when someone bumped into her while carrying a tray. But Isabel had turned the minor accident into a theater of cruelty, and now all 200 guests at Manhattan's most exclusive event were witnessing the spectacle. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Kendra said, her voice maintaining a calm that surprised even herself, even as blood began to dot her scalp where hair had been yanked out with brutal force. "It was completely accidental. Let me clean." "You're going to do more than clean it up," Isabel interrupted, turning dramatically to the crowd of socialites and executives who watched with expressions ranging from discomfort to morbid curiosity. "You're going to compensate me for this dress. $15,000. Now." Kendra felt the familiar tightness in her chest, that feeling of being judged, diminished, reduced to a racist stereotype that people like Isabel carried as second nature. But there was something different this time. 3 years of unimaginable loss, of fighting a medical system that prioritized profit over life, of turning personal tragedy into tireless purpose, had forged something unbreakable within her. "Ma'am, I don't have $15,000, Kendra replied with a dignity that made several people in the crowd unconsciously straighten their posture. "But I have employer's insurance that will cover proper cleaning of the dress." Isabel let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Cleaning? Honey, this dress is ruined. Completely destroyed." She gestured at the almost invisible drops. "And you," she walked dangerously close to Kendra, "should be thankful I'm not calling the police for assault." The absurdity of the accusation, a waitress being accused of assault by the woman who literally ripped her hair out, would have been comical if it weren't so revealing of the power dynamics at play. That was when a man approached the circle that had formed around them. Tall, approximately 50 years old, with impeccably combed gray hair and a suit that cost more than a popular car. His blue eyes scanned the scene with the speed of someone accustomed to assessing complex situations in seconds. "Isabel," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority that immediately silenced conversations at nearby tables. "What's going on here?" Isabel turned to him with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Charles, dear. This employee destroyed my dress and is refusing to take responsibility." Charles Montgomery, tech billionaire, philanthropist, and Isabel's husband of 12 years, studied his wife for a long moment. Then his eyes moved to Kendra, and something changed in his expression. Not pity. Recognition. Kendra held his gaze firmly, even as tears still glistened in her eyes from the physical pain of the attack. And in that brief moment of eye contact, a silent communication passed between them. He saw not a waitress but a person. An equal. "Isabel," Charles said slowly, never taking his eyes off Kendra, "did you pull her hair?" "She attacked me with champagne." Isabel protested, her voice taking on the shrill tone of a child caught in a lie. Charles finally looked at his wife, and for the first time in 12 years of marriage, Isabel saw something in his eyes that made her instinctively recoil. Not anger. Utter disappointment. "I saw everything from the head table," he said calmly. "Someone bumped into her. It was an accident. You physically attacked this young woman over a few drops of champagne." The hall was completely silent now. Even the orchestra had stopped playing. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on the scene unfolding like a modern version of Greek drama. "Charles, you're embarrassing me in front of everyone," Isabel hissed. "No," he replied, his voice still calm but laden with finality. "You did this to yourself." He turned to Kendra. "What is your name?" "Kendra Mitchell, sir." "Ms. Mitchell, please accept my apologies on behalf of my wife. Her behavior was completely unacceptable." He paused. "Do you need medical attention?" Kendra touched her bruised scalp lightly. "No, sir. I'll be fine." But Charles had seen the blood on her fingers when she lowered her hand. He turned to one of the event organizers. "Please call paramedics. And I would like to speak with Mrs. Mitchell privately after she has received treatment." "This is ridiculous." Isabel exploded. "Charles, she's a maid. You're making a scandal out of nothing." Charles looked at her, and what Isabel saw in his eyes made her finally understand that something fundamental had changed. "Isabel, you physically assaulted someone. In front of 200 witnesses. Including 3 lawyers, 2 judges, and security cameras." He gestured to the discrete cameras in the corners of the hall. For the first time, genuine fear crossed Isabel's face. Kendra watched everything with that same outward calm, but inside, memories flooded back. Her younger sister Riley, diagnosed with a rare disease at age 19. Pharmaceutical companies refusing to cover experimental medication that could save her because it wasn't cost-effective for a disease that affected fewer than 10,000 people. Riley dying 3 months later while Kendra, then a law student at Columbia, watched helplessly. What Isabel Montgomery didn't know, what would have been impossible for her to imagine looking at that simple waitress, was that Kendra Mitchell had dropped out of law school after Riley's death to work as a freelance investigator, specializing in exposing pharmaceutical fraud and corporate negligence. That she had spent 3 years infiltrating high society events, gathering information, building cases. And that Isabel Montgomery, heir to the pharmaceutical fortune that denied Riley treatment, had just committed documented physical assault against the person who had been quietly and methodically building a federal case against her family's company. If you're enjoying this story about what happens when privilege meets consequence, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what Charles Montgomery is about to discover about his wife and the woman she attacked will shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew. The paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, and Kendra sat quietly while they cleaned the small wounds on her scalp. Isabel had disappeared into the ladies' room, surrounded by her circle of socialite friends who murmured consolations while casting judgmental glances in Kendra's direction. "She's going to sue for sure," one of them whispered loud enough to be heard. "These people are always looking for ways to make easy money." Kendra didn't react. She had learned long ago that strategic silence was more powerful than emotional confrontation. Instead, she discreetly photographed her injuries with her cell phone before the paramedics covered them with band-aids. Documentation. Always documentation. "Ms. Mitchell," Charles's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He had waited patiently while she received treatment. "Would you accompany me to the manager's office? I'd like to discuss appropriate compensation for what happened." Kendra followed him across the hall, feeling the stares burning into her back. The manager's office was elegantly furnished, all dark wood and leather. Charles closed the door and gestured to a chair. "Please, have a seat. And please accept my apologies again." He paused, studying her carefully. "Ms. Mitchell, may I ask how long you've been working as a waitress?" The question was casual, but Kendra detected genuine curiosity behind it. "I do freelance work at events, sir. Approximately 3 years." "And before that?" Kendra hesitated only a fraction of a second. "I was studying law at Columbia." Charles's eyebrows rose slightly. "Columbia. Impressive. Why did you stop?" "Family issues," Kendra replied, keeping her voice neutral. Technically true, though she didn't reveal that those family matters had turned into a personal crusade against an entire industry. Charles nodded slowly. "I see." He opened a drawer and took out a checkbook. "Ms. Mitchell, what my wife did was physical assault. You would have every right to sue. I would like to offer generous compensation in hopes of resolving this discreetly." Kendra watched as he wrote a check. When he turned it to her, the amount made her blink. $50,000. "Mr. Montgomery, that's insufficient, I agree," Charles interrupted. "But it's a start. I would also like to cover any medical expenses, and if you decide to pursue legal action, I won't blame you." Kendra stared at the check, quickly processing the implications. Accepting it could be seen as an admission of guilt. But refusing it would raise suspicions about why a freelance waitress would turn down $50,000. "Mr. Montgomery, can I be honest with you? Please. I don't want your money. I want assurance that your wife understands that what she did was wrong. Not just illegal, but fundamentally wrong." Charles studied her for a long moment. You are an unusual person, Ms. Mitchell. Just someone tired of seeing people think money buys them the right to treat others as less than human. That was when the door swung open abruptly. Isabel entered, her face perfectly composed, followed by a man in an expensive suit carrying a leather briefcase. Charles, this is Gerald Blackstone, our lawyer, Isabel announced. He's going to handle this situation. Gerald looked at Kendra with the kind of disdain reserved for those he clearly considered to be trying to extort his wealthy clients. Miss Mitchell, let's be blunt. My client is willing to offer $5,000 in exchange for a full release of liability and a confidentiality agreement. Kendra almost laughed. $5,000 compared to the $50,000 Charles had offered. Isabel clearly had no idea what her husband had just done. Gerald, Charles said, his voice taking on a sharp edge, Ms. Mitchell and I have already discussed compensation. I offered $50,000. Gerald blinked. 50? Charles, that sets a dangerous precedent. For physically assaulting employees? Charles cut in. Yes, it really does. The precedent that there are consequences. Isabel was looking between the two men with growing agitation. Charles, you can't seriously be taking her side against your own wife. I'm not taking sides, Isabel. I'm taking the side of what's right. He turned to Kendra. Ms. Mitchell declined my offer, by the way. She wants an apology, not money. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Isabel looked at Kendra as if seeing her for the first time. You turned down $50,000? I don't need your money, Mrs. Montgomery. I need you to understand that you can't treat people like this. Something dangerous flashed in Isabel's eyes. You're trying to make me look bad. This is a setup. You spilled champagne on me on purpose, didn't you? To create a scene. Kendra kept her expression carefully neutral, but inside, her investigator's mind was cataloging every word. Isabel was digging herself deeper with every sentence. Isabel, Gerald said quickly, maybe we should discuss this in private. No. Isabel turned to Kendra, her face red with anger and humiliation. I know your type. Coming to our events, looking for opportunities. You probably consulted a lawyer before you even came here today. Charles stood up abruptly. Isabel, stop. Now. But Isabel was beyond rational control now. All the years of unquestioned privilege, of never facing real consequences for her actions, were manifesting in an explosion of defensive rage. Do you know what your family does? Kendra asked calmly, and something in her voice made everyone in the room freeze. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. Your family business. Do you know the drugs it produces? Isabel blinked, destabilized by the change of subject. What does that have to do with? Do you know the drugs it refuses to produce? The ones for rare diseases that aren't profitable enough? The air in the room changed. Charles was watching Kendra with new intensity. My younger sister had Hutchinson-Gilford syndrome, Kendra continued, her voice remaining calm but gaining emotional weight that made even Gerald lower his briefcase. A rare genetic disease. Less than 400 cases worldwide. There was an experimental drug that could have helped. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals owned the patent. Isabel paled visibly. They refused to produce it because it wouldn't be profitable enough. 400 lives versus billions of dollars in other drugs. The math didn't work in her favor. Kendra paused. Riley was 19 when she died. 3 years ago. The silence was absolute. Charles had slowly sat down, his face drained of color. So yes, Mrs. Montgomery, Kendra continued, I know exactly who your family is. And no, I didn't spill champagne on you on purpose. But maybe the universe has a sense of irony. Isabel found her voice, though it came out shaky. The company makes decisions based on economic viability. It's not personal. It's not personal, Kendra repeated, and for the first time, she allowed real emotion to seep into her voice. My sister died because it wasn't economically viable to save her. And today you physically attacked me, pulled my hair, humiliated me publicly, because I accidentally spilled champagne on your dress. She stood up. Then forgive me if I see a connection between those two events. Both about people deciding that other lives matter less than their own comfort. Charles was standing now too, his hands shaking slightly as he pressed them onto the table. Ms. Mitchell, I didn't know. About your sister. About that. There was no reason for you to know, Mr. Montgomery. I was just another file. Another rejection letter. Another family that didn't matter. Kendra picked up her purse. Thank you for the check, but I won't be accepting it. And I won't sue, Ms. Montgomery. Not because you deserve my pity, but because I have more important things to do than sue cruel socialites. She walked toward the door, but Charles spoke. Wait. Please. Kendra stopped, her hand on the doorknob. You said you studied law. And that you do freelance work now. What kind of work? Kendra turned slowly. Investigation. Corporate fraud. Medical malpractice. Cases where big companies hurt ordinary people and think they can get away with it. Charles's eyes widened with understanding. You're investigating Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Kendra neither confirmed nor denied it, but her silence spoke volumes. For 3 years, Charles continued, the pieces falling into place. You've been at events like this. Gathering information. Building a case. Charles, you can't seriously be believing her, Isabel protested. She clearly has a vendetta. Shut up, Isabel, Charles said, and the absolute tone of his voice made even Gerald recoil. He had never spoken to her like that in 12 years of marriage. He looked at Kendra. Do you have a case? Kendra met his eyes. I have 3 years of documentation. Leaked internal emails. Testimonies from researchers who were silenced. A pattern of decisions putting profit over lives. And today, she lightly touched the band-aid on her scalp, I have the heir to the fortune committing documented physical assault at a public event with 200 witnesses and security cameras. That's extortion. Gerald exploded. No, Kendra corrected calmly. Extortion would be if I threatened to expose something unless I was paid. I'm not doing that. I'm simply stating facts. And the fact is that in 6 weeks, I will be filing a federal case against Montgomery Pharmaceuticals for systematic negligence resulting in preventable deaths. Isabel collapsed into a chair, the full weight of the situation finally penetrating through her arrogance. Gerald was frantically leafing through his briefcase as if the answers might be hidden there. And Charles Montgomery, the billionaire who had built a technology empire based on disruption and transparency, who had married into the oldest pharmaceutical family on the East Coast, was looking at the woman his wife had just attacked and seeing not a threat, but something much more disturbing. Justice. Charles walked slowly to the window, looking out at the lights of Manhattan as he processed everything he had just heard. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangely calm. Gerald, Isabel, leave. I need to speak with Mrs. Mitchell alone. Charles, this is completely, Isabel began. Now. The command left no room for argument. Gerald practically dragged Isabel out, closing the door behind them. Kendra remained standing near the door, her body tense, ready to leave at any moment. You know what's funny? Charles said, still looking out the window. When I met the Montgomery family 15 years ago, I was impressed by their legacy. 120 years of pharmaceutical innovation. Drugs that saved millions of lives. It seemed noble. He turned to face her. I built my company, TechBridge Solutions, on one principle: technology should serve people, not profit. I became a billionaire doing just that. Then I married into the family I thought shared those values. Mr. Montgomery. Call me Charles. Please. He sat down heavily. You're not the first person to come to me with complaints about Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. But you're the first who's actually done something about it. Kendra remained cautiously silent. 6 months ago, an internal whistleblower came to me, Charles continued. Dr. Helen Reeves. Senior researcher. She told me about decisions being made purely for profit, ignoring science. About effective drugs being shelved because the market was too small. I confronted the board. He laughed bitterly. They assured me it was all a misunderstanding. Complex regulatory issues. And you believed them? I wanted to believe them. He met her eyes. Because the alternative was to admit that I had built my life alongside people who fundamentally contradict everything I have ever stood for. Kendra studied him carefully. Investigators learn to read people, to distinguish genuine manipulation from performance. Charles Montgomery was genuinely distressed. "Dr. Reeves," Kendra said slowly. She worked on Project Horizon. Treatment for Hutchison-Gilford. Charles closed his eyes. "The drug that could have saved your sister." She was fired 3 months after Riley died. Officially for departmental restructuring. But really for asking too many questions about why the project was cancelled, Charles finished. "She told me." "Kendra, may I call you Kendra?" She nodded. "She told me she presented data showing that the drug worked. That it could help not only Hutchison-Gilford, but potentially an entire class of rare genetic diseases. But the board decided that treating 400 patients didn't justify the investment when the same resources could develop another cholesterol drug that would treat millions." "Cold math," Kendra said, her voice controlled but tense. "Corporate murder," Charles corrected. "Let's call it what it is." He stood up, walking to a shelf where he picked up a thick folder. "After Dr. Reeves came to me, I started my own investigation. Discreetly. Using resources available to me as the largest individual shareholder." He placed the folder on the table. 3 years of internal emails. Board memos. Cost-benefit analyses that literally put a price on human lives. Kendra stared at the folder as if it were a poisonous snake. "I was planning to expose this," Charles continued. "But I needed the right moment. Enough evidence. And frankly, the courage to destroy my wife's family." He paused. "And my marriage. Why are you telling me this?" "Because you have 3 years of outside work. I have 3 years of inside access. Together, we have a case that not only wins in court, it changes an entire industry." Kendra sat up slowly, processing what she was hearing. "You're offering to collaborate? Against your own in-laws?" "Family who let your sister die for money," Charles said, his voice hardening. "Family who my wife has just demonstrated, very publicly, has no basic respect for human beings she considers beneath her." He pushed the folder across the table. "They're not my family, Kendra. They never were. It just took me an embarrassingly long time to admit it." Kendra opened the folder carefully. The first document was an internal email from 2019, 3 months before Riley was diagnosed. Subject line, Horizon Project, recommendation for cancellation. Her eyes scanned quickly. Insufficient projected return on investment. Too limited patient base. Reallocation of resources to more profitable third-generation statin development. "Page 12, Charles said calmly. "There's a spreadsheet. Every rare disease they had the capacity to treat. Every one cancelled because the math didn't work." Kendra turned to page 12 and felt the air leave her lungs. There it was, a meticulously documented list of 23 different rare diseases. Next to each one, estimated number of patients, projected development cost, projected revenue, and final status. All marked, cancelled ROI insufficient. Hutchison-Gilford was number 7. 400 patients globally, she read aloud, her voice breaking slightly. Estimated development cost, $45 million. Projected revenue over 10 years, $180 million. Cancelled because third-generation statins projected $2.3 billion. "Your sister was worth $45 million, Charles said softly. "But not $2.3 billion. That was the equation that killed her." Tears finally escaped Kendra's eyes. 3 years of controlled anger, methodical investigation, relentless purpose, all leading to this moment of seeing in black and white exactly how much Riley's life had been deemed to be worth. $45 million, she whispered. "You spend more than that on a single Super Bowl ad." "They do," Charles corrected. "I'm not part of that. I never have been. My company is technology, not pharmaceuticals. I'm a shareholder in Montgomery Pharmaceuticals only through marriage and Isabel's family inheritance." He sat down across from her. "Kendra, I know you have no reason to trust me. I'm the husband of the woman who just assaulted you. Family by marriage to the company that killed your sister. But I'm offering everything I have, inside access, financial resources for lengthy lawsuits, sworn testimony, to help you destroy them." "Why?" Kendra asked, wiping away tears. "Why risk everything?" Because I have a daughter, Charles said, and something in his voice broke. Emma. She's 9. And every night when I put her to bed, I think of all the children my wife's family decided weren't worth saving. And I ask myself, what kind of man am I if I know this and do nothing? He pulled a photo from his wallet. A smiling girl with pigtails, holding a soccer trophy. Emma idolizes her mother. She doesn't know that people she loves make decisions that kill other children. And I can't. I can't let her grow up thinking that's acceptable. Kendra looked at the photo, then at Charles, and saw not a convenient ally, but a desperate father trying to do the right thing before it was too late to teach his daughter about real morality. I have conditions, she said finally. Name them. First, total control of the investigation. You provide information, but I direct. Second, everything is documented through third-party attorneys. No direct communication that could be interpreted as conspiracy. Third, when this becomes public, and it will, you face the consequences. Divorce, social ostracism, whatever comes. I accept everything, Charles said without hesitation. But I have a condition of my own. What is it? When Emma asks why I destroyed her parents' marriage, I want to be able to tell her that I did it for someone named Riley Mitchell. I want her to meet you. Hear your story. Understand that real people suffer when we prioritize profit over life. Kendra felt a new lump in her throat. You want to use this to teach your daughter morality? I want her to have a better example than I had. To act sooner. To never have to wonder if she was on the right side. At that moment, the door burst open. Isabel was back, Gerald behind her looking defeated. Charles, I just got a call from Bethany Ashford, Isabel said, her phone trembling in her hand. Someone posted today's video on Instagram. The attack. Everything. Her face was pale. It has 50,000 views in 2 hours. Charles and Kendra exchanged glances. Who posted it? Charles asked. I don't know, Isabel said, panic rising in her voice. Anonymous account. But they identified you, they identified our family, they identified, she looked at Kendra with something close to horror. They identified you as investigator working on case against Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. Kendra felt adrenaline rush through her. She hadn't posted anything. Not yet. So who? Her phone vibrated. Message from an unknown number. We hope this helps. Justice for Riley. Dr. H.R. Dr. Helen Reeves. The whistleblower Charles had mentioned. How many views now? Kendra asked calmly. Isabel checked, her face turning greener. 120,000. And growing. Charles picked up his own phone, typing rapidly. It's trending on Twitter. Hashtag Montgomery Pharmaceuticals. Hashtag Justice for Rare Patients. Hashtag Priority over Profit. He looked at Kendra, and for the first time that night, allowed himself a small smile. Looks like your timeline just accelerated. Gerald was hyperventilating. We need damage control. Now. Press statement. Legal action against whoever posted. No, Charles interrupted him. We're not doing any of that. Charles. Isabel shouted. Our reputation is being destroyed. No, he corrected, standing up and walking over to stand beside Kendra. Your reputation is being revealed. There's a difference. And while Isabel broke down in angry tears, while Gerald frantically made calls to crisis lawyers, while Manhattan watched video of socialite pulling waitress's hair go viral across social media, Kendra Mitchell and Charles Montgomery stood united. United not by friendship or convenient alliance, but by something rarer, a shared sense that some things matter more than money, reputation, or family. Things like justice for a 19-year-old girl who died because she wasn't worth a $45 million investment. 72 hours later, the video had 8 million views. All the major news networks had covered the story. Pharmaceutical heiress attacks investigator who exposes corporate negligence was the headline that dominated the news cycle. But the second twist that no one expected happened on the morning of the fourth day. Charles Montgomery called a press conference in the TechBridge Solutions auditorium. 200 journalists filled the space, cameras from all the major networks pointed at the empty podium. Rumors had circulated overnight. Charles would defend his wife, sue whoever leaked the video, use his fortune to bury the scandal. When he took the podium, Isabel was conspicuously absent. But sitting in the front row was Kendra Mitchell, and next to her, a woman of about 55 with gray hair, Dr. Helen Reeves. "Good morning," Charles began, his voice steady despite deep dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming. I have a statement to make, and then I will take questions." He took a deep breath. "4 days ago, my wife, Isabel Montgomery, committed physical assault against Kendra Mitchell during a charity event. The video you have all seen is authentic and complete. There is no additional context that justifies those actions. Isabel acted with cruelty motivated by racial prejudice and class arrogance." Murmurs rippled through the room. Journalists typed frantically. "But that's not the real story," Charles continued. "The real story is why Kendra Mitchell was at that event. And what I've discovered over the past 4 days about the company my in-laws have controlled for over a century." He gestured to the screen behind him. An image of the spreadsheet appeared, the list of 23 rare diseases that had been cancelled. "This is an internal document from Montgomery Pharmaceuticals, dated 2019. It shows deliberate decisions to cancel the development of drugs for rare diseases because the return on investment was insufficient." The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions, but Charles raised his hand. Item number 7. Hutchison-Gilford syndrome. 400 patients globally. Viable treatment identified. Cancelled because a $45 million investment would not generate billions in return. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. One of the patients who died because of that cancellation was Riley Mitchell, Kendra's sister. She was 19 years old. Cameras turned to Kendra, who remained seated calmly, her dignity intact despite tears running silently down her face. "Kendra spent 3 years investigating Montgomery Pharmaceuticals," Charles said. "Working events like this to gather information, build a case. She didn't spill champagne on my wife on purpose. But when my wife reacted by pulling her hair, it revealed exactly the kind of person who runs a company that makes decisions like these." He clicked to the next slide. "I have emails, memos, financial analyses covering 6 years. All documenting a pattern of decisions that put profit absolutely above human lives. I'm not talking about difficult medical decisions or scientific limitations. I'm talking about deliberate choices not to save lives because it's not profitable enough." The CNN reporter stood up. "Mr. Montgomery, are you aware that you are potentially destroying your family's company?" "It's not my family," Charles replied, his voice gaining strength. "And it's already destroyed. I'm just making the destruction visible." Wall Street Journal reporter, "Are you facing divorce?" "Isabel filed for divorce yesterday. I am cooperating fully. I am also resigning as a shareholder of Montgomery Pharmaceuticals and donating all shares to a trust fund dedicated to rare disease research." The auditorium fell silent. "How much are those shares worth?" someone asked. "Approximately $1.2 billion. Chaos erupted. Journalists shouted questions over each other. Cameras flashed. People called their editors. Charles waited for the noise to subside. "But there's more," he said, and the tone of his voice made everyone quiet again. "Because Kendra's investigation uncovered something that even my internal documents didn't show." He motioned to Kendra, who stood up and walked to the podium. Her voice was clear when she spoke. "Montgomery Pharmaceuticals didn't just cancel research," she said. "They actively blocked others from conducting it. When universities or small pharmaceutical companies tried to develop treatments for these same diseases, Montgomery used their patents to sue and paralyze them. Not only did they decide not to save lives, they made sure no one else could either." She clicked through to the next slides. "Here's the lawsuit against Johns Hopkins University in 2020. Here's the forced settlement with a Swiss startup in 2021. In each case, Montgomery Pharmaceuticals had related patents that they weren't technically using, but they used as legal weapons to stifle competition." Dr. Reeves joined them on the podium. "I was fired because I discovered this," she said. "When I questioned why we were suing researchers trying to help patients we had abandoned, I was called not a team player. 3 weeks later, I was fired." NPR reporter, "Dr. Reeves, did you leak the original video?" Helen smiled. "I was at the charity event. I saw it all happen. And when I saw the heiress of the company that silenced my research literally assault the woman whose sister died because of our decisions, yes, I recorded it. And yes, I posted it. Aren't you afraid of being sued? Sue me. Helen laughed. Please. I have 3 years of documents showing that Montgomery Pharmaceuticals systematically allowed people to die for greed. They can try. I can't wait to testify under oath. Charles returned to the microphone. Here's what's going to happen now. First, these documents are being sent to the FDA, the Department of Justice, and the Senate Health Committee. Second, I am personally funding class action lawsuits on behalf of families affected by these decisions. Third, the trust fund I mentioned will be administered by an independent board including Kendra Mitchell and Dr. Reeves, dedicated specifically to developing treatments that Montgomery Pharmaceuticals abandoned. New York Times reporter, this is unprecedented. Why are you doing this? Charles looked directly at the camera. Because I have a 9-year-old daughter. And when she grows up and asks me what I did when I found out that the family I married was killing people for money, I want to be able to say that I did the right thing, even if it took far too long. At that moment, the auditorium doors opened. Isabel Montgomery entered, surrounded by 3 lawyers. Her face was pale but composed, her chin held defiantly high. I have a statement, she announced, walking toward the podium. Charles stepped back, giving her space. The room was electrically silent. My husband is lying, Isabel said, her voice trembling slightly but firm. He is fabricating evidence to harm my family's company out of personal revenge. The documents have been tampered with. The alleged victim, she gestured toward Kendra, is an extortionist who engineered this entire situation. Kendra remained perfectly still, but a small smile touched her lips. Ms. Montgomery, the CNN reporter called out. Do you deny pulling Ms. Mitchell's hair? It was an instinctive reaction when she deliberately spilled champagne on me. The video clearly shows her being bumped by another guest, the reporter interrupted. Isabel changed tactics. Even if it was an accident, my reaction does not justify this coordinated campaign of destruction against my family. Ms. Montgomery, Kendra spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the noise. Do you remember Riley Mitchell? Isabel blinked. I don't know that name. No, you don't. She was just a number on a spreadsheet. Patient number 247 in Project Horizon's clinical trial before it was cancelled. She died 3 months after your company decided she wasn't worth saving. I don't make medical decisions. No, but you benefit from them, Kendra continued, walking to stand face to face with Isabel. Every $15,000 dinner, every designer dress, every exclusive club, paid for with money your family earned by deciding that lives are worth less than profit. And when you saw me, when you saw a black woman serving champagne, you assumed I was nothing. Less than human. Just like your company assumes about patients who aren't profitable. This is defamation. It's documented truth, Charles interrupted. Isabel, it's over. The Montgomery Pharmaceuticals board called an emergency meeting for this afternoon. 3 members have already resigned. Federal agencies have opened investigations. And yes, we're going to face a lawsuit. But the difference is that our side has the truth. Isabel looked around the auditorium, seeing only hostile stares. Her lawyers whispered urgently among themselves. Finally, something inside her snapped. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising. We can't save everyone. Resources are limited. We have to make choices. Choices based on money, not medicine, Dr. Reeves cut in. I was there, Isabel. At the meetings where the board decided that 400 lives weren't worth the investment that could have saved them all. It wasn't scientific impossibility. It was greed. Isabel looked at Charles one last time. You're destroying everything. No, he replied softly. You destroyed it. I'm just making sure everyone sees it. And as Isabel left the auditorium, her lawyers rushing after her, journalists exploding in a frenzy of questions, camera flashes lighting up the room like a storm of lightning, Kendra Mitchell remained at the podium. She lightly touched the band-aid still covering where Isabel had pulled her hair 4 days ago. A small physical injury that had triggered an avalanche of justice 3 years in the making. I have one last thing, she said, and her voice silenced the chaos. Riley wasn't the only one. There are 23 diseases on that list. Hundreds, maybe thousands of patients over the years. Each with a family. Each one who mattered. She held up a photo, Riley at 18, smiling in her high school cap and gown, a week before she was diagnosed. This is my sister. This is why I spent 3 years investigating. Why I took a job as a waitress at rich people's events. Why I documented every piece of evidence. Not for revenge. For justice. So that no other family has to bury someone they love because the math didn't work in their favor. And as that image of Riley Mitchell appeared on television screens around the world, as trending topics exploded, as Montgomery Pharmaceuticals faced its first real accountability in its 120-year history, one thing became absolutely clear. A racist socialite had pulled the wrong person's hair. And the whole world was about to learn that underestimating people can cost far more than any fortune could ever be worth. 18 months later, Kendra Mitchell adjusted her blazer as she entered the federal courthouse in Manhattan. The class action lawsuit against Montgomery Pharmaceuticals had lasted 6 weeks, and today the jury would return with its verdict. The room was packed. Families of patients who had died from rare diseases filled the galleries. Lawyers on both sides frantically reviewed their notes. And in the front row on the defense side, alone and visibly diminished, sat Isabel Montgomery. Her empire had collapsed spectacularly. Montgomery Pharmaceuticals faced not only federal litigation but investigations in 12 countries. The board had been completely replaced. The company had been forced to license its rare disease patents free of charge to any research institution that wanted to use them. Isabel had personally lost everything. Her divorce from Charles had cost her half of their shared assets. Her high society friends had evaporated. Exclusive clubs revoked her memberships. Charitable foundations removed her from all their boards. Her own family had shunned her when scandal threatened to destroy what remained of the Montgomery reputation. She now lived in a modest apartment in Queens, working as a freelance consultant for small public relations firms that either didn't know, or cared about, her story. At 44, she had discovered for the first time in her life what it meant to be invisible, disposable, judged solely by the work she produced rather than the surname she carried. Charles, on the other hand, had become an unlikely hero. His decision to expose corruption and donate $1.2 billion had inspired a global movement. The Riley Mitchell Fund for Rare Disease Research had funded the development of treatments for 17 different conditions. 3 were already in clinical trials. 1, a treatment for Hutchison-Gilford that could have saved Riley, was showing promising results. He had remarried, to a civil rights lawyer he had met during the investigation. Emma, now 11, volunteered on Saturdays at the fund's office, filing letters from families thanking her for hope they had never had before. Dr. Helen Reeves ran the fund's scientific division, leading a team of researchers who could now work without the pressure of ROI. "We do medicine, not math," she said in a recent interview. "Every life matters equally." And Kendra had become the national face of pharmaceutical reform. Her testimony before Congress led to bipartisan legislation requiring pharmaceutical companies to license and use patents for rare disease research. Her book, Riley's Law, When Profit Kills, spent 20 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. But none of that would matter if the jury did not return with the correct verdict. "All rise," the court officer announced. Judge Anderson entering. The judge, a black woman in her 60s with a reputation for relentless fairness, sat down and adjusted her glasses. "I understand the jury has reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The jury foreman, a middle-aged Asian man, stood up. His hands trembled slightly as he held the paper. "In the case of Mitchell versus Montgomery Pharmaceuticals, on the charges of corporate negligence resulting in preventable death, we find the defendant guilty." The room erupted. Families cried, hugging each other. Reporters rushed outside to file their stories. Isabel covered her face with her hands. "Order." Judge Anderson banged his gavel. "There's more." The spokesman continued, his voice steadier now. "As for punitive damages, the jury orders Montgomery Pharmaceuticals to pay $200 million in compensation to affected families, $800 million in funds to establish permanent rare disease research centers, and a fine of $1.5 billion to the federal government. $2.5 billion. The largest fine for corporate negligence in American pharmaceutical history. Isabel was crying openly now. Her lawyers were already whispering about an appeal, but everyone knew it was useless. The evidence had been overwhelming. The testimony devastating. And most importantly, a jury of 12 ordinary people had looked at documents, heard stories, and decided that some things mattered more than profit. After the court was dismissed, Kendra found herself alone in the hallway with Isabel. Charles and the lawyers were in conference rooms dealing with the press. It was just the two of them, for the first time since that night 18 months ago. "You must be satisfied," Isabel said, her voice broken. "You destroyed everything." Kendra studied her for a long moment. "I didn't destroy anything, Isabel. I just showed what your family built on a foundation of discarded lives. I lost everything. My marriage. My family. My friends. My money." "And Riley lost her life," Kendra replied calmly. "At 19. Before he could graduate from college, fall in love, have a family. You lost privileges. She lost her future." Isabel leaned back against the wall, sliding down to sit on the hallway floor. "It wasn't my responsibility. I never worked for the company. I just lived off the fortune." "Exactly," Kendra said, sitting down beside her. "You lived off a fortune built on decisions that killed people. And when you saw me, when you saw a black woman serving you, you assumed I was nothing. Less than human. You attacked me because you could. Because you've never faced real consequences in your life." "I'm facing them now," Isabel whispered. "Yes. You are." Kendra paused. "And you know what's funny? You're living in Queens now. Working to pay rent. Being judged for what you produce, not who you are. For the first time in your life, you're experiencing how 99% of the world lives. And you call that losing everything." Isabel looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "How can you not hate me?" "Because hate won't bring Riley back," Kendra replied. "And because you're not important enough to hate. You were just a symptom. A privileged person who never learned that actions have consequences. The whole system needs to change, not just you." She stood up, holding out her hand. "But the system is changing now. Because of Riley. And ironically, because of you, because you attacked the wrong person at the wrong time, and that set everything in motion." Isabel stared at the outstretched hand for a long moment, then took it, letting Kendra help her up. "What are you going to do now?" Isabel asked. "Keep fighting. There are other pharmaceutical companies doing the same things. Other Rileys who need someone to fight for them." Kendra paused. "What about you?" "I don't know. Therapy, I guess. Trying to understand who I am when I'm not the Montgomery heir. It's a start." 3 years later, Kendra received an unexpected email. It was from Isabel. "Ms. Mitchell, I know I have no right to ask for your time. But I wanted you to know that I've spent the last 3 years working with patient advocacy groups. Not in a leadership position, just basic volunteering. Helping families navigate the health insurance system. It's small. But it's something. I've also started speaking at schools about privilege and consequences. I use my own story as a cautionary tale. Students need to hear from someone who has lived at the top that privilege is no excuse for cruelty. I will never make up for what my family did. Or what I personally did to you. But I am trying to do something useful with what's left of my life. I thought you might want to know. No need to reply. Just, thank you. For showing that some things matter more than money. Isabel." Kendra stared at the email for a long time. Then she typed a simple reply, "Keep working." Riley would have approved. That same day, she received more news. The Hutchison-Gilford treatment funded by the Riley Mitchell Fund had completed Phase 3 trials. Success rate, 87%. The FDA had granted accelerated approval. It wouldn't save Riley. Nothing could. But it would save the next child diagnosed. And the next. And the next. Kendra drove to the cemetery where Riley was buried. Simple grave, modest headstone. She placed fresh flowers and sat on the grass. "We did it, she whispered. "We changed the system. Not perfectly. Not completely. But enough so that the next girl with her disease has a chance to fight." The wind blew through the trees, carrying flower petals. And for a moment, Kendra could have sworn she heard Riley's laughter, that bright, carefree laughter that lit up any room. She stood up, wiping away tears. She had a meeting in an hour with senators about new legislation. An interview later about a case against another pharmaceutical company. A lecture at Harvard the following week on systemic reform. Life had become a crusade that Riley had unwittingly started when he died. And Kendra would carry that torch until the last rare disease patient had hope, until the last corporate executive learned that profit should never come before life, until the last arrogant privileged person understood that all people, all of them, had an equal right to dignity. A racist socialite had pulled a waitress's hair that night 4 years ago. But that waitress was no helpless victim. She was a force of nature on pause, an investigator armed with 3 years of evidence, and a sister carrying the weight of love and loss that would turn pain into purpose. And when that hair was pulled, when that public humiliation happened, when that video went viral, every machine Kendra had carefully built over 3 years finally had its spark. Charles did the right thing in the end. He deserved credit for that. But he wasn't a savior. He was an ally who recognized he was on the wrong side and had the courage to switch sides. Isabel faced consequences and was slowly trying to become a better person. That also deserved recognition, even if it could never make up for the damage done. But the real story was about Riley. About the 23 diseases on that list. About hundreds of patients who deserved better than a cost-benefit equation deciding whether they were worth saving. And about the fact that sometimes justice doesn't come from courts or laws or politicians. It comes from ordinary people who refuse to accept that the world is unfair. Who choose to fight even when fighting seems impossible. Who turn personal tragedy into systemic change because that's what love does. It persists, it fights, and ultimately it wins. If this story touched you, if you believe that every human life has equal value regardless of the profit it generates, subscribe to the channel for more stories proving that the best revenge is never to destroy your enemies. It is to build a world where the kind of cruelty they represent can no longer survive. Because in the end, Isabel Montgomery pulled Kendra Mitchell's hair out thinking she was just an unimportant black waitress. But that waitress carried the love of a dead sister, anger at a broken system, and the determination of someone who learned that true strength does not come from money or privilege. It comes from refusing to let injustice win. And that refusal changed everything.